So Zoe's just put some notes in the chat for everyone, a bit of a reminder on some of the points. Okay, are we all right to get going? Yeah, good to go. Brilliant. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. My name's Ali. I am one of the designers from Thrive by Design, and today's session is Online and Feeling Fine: Mindful User Experience and User Interface Design for Better Mental Health. I'm joined today by a panel of experts who all have their own experience designing with mental health in mind. I'll do a few kind of housekeeping points in a second, and then we'll go into introductions. And then the panel will explore the question, and then we'll do a little bit of a wrap up with some key points to take away from today's session. And then we should possibly have some time for some audience questions, and then we'll kind of close up the session today. So the session will run till 11. So I'm just reading my notes, and we'll also be able to share our contact details. So if you'd like to continue on with the conversation today, the contact details will be available at the end of the session. So let me just read my housekeeping notes. So everyone should have the captions function available. So that's at the bottom right hand of the screen, and it should say live transcript. So you should have that available. If you've got any problems, please put a note in the chat function, and Zoe should be able to help you. Other notes are, if you've got any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and you should be able to leave your questions there, and we'll try and answer them at the end of the session. You can also kind of generally contribute using the chat function at the bottom of the screen as well. The session will be recorded and shared with anyone who's signed up to the event. You can, as I said, you can contact the panelists at the end of the session, and their contact information will be shared and circulated post-session. You can also contact Zoe, who's kindly facilitating today, was helping with facilitation today. If you could put your email in the chat box, Zoe, that'd be really helpful. And Zoe can circulate the transcript after the session. As I said, my name's Ali. One of my colleagues, Kirstin, is on the session today, and we're going to go into some introductions now. Can I please hand over to Kirstin to do your introduction, and then we'll kind of go around the panel. Thanks, Kirstin.
Thanks, Ali. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this session. It's really good to see so many people here. So my name's Kirstin Blackwell, and I'm part of the team at Thrive by Design. So if you don't know us, we're an NHS-hosted team, and we work across health and care. Our mission is to co-design inclusive digital innovation and improvement to support everyone to thrive. And we're actually hosted by Leeds and York Partnership Foundation Trust. So I've seen at least one person from LYPFT is in the chat, so hello, and thanks for being here. So if you don't know LYPFT, it's a mental health provider trust with services in Leeds and across the wider area. And I guess we're really interested in this session today for two reasons. So obviously being hosted by the Mental Health Trust, we do a lot of work in mental health as well. I've recently been supporting some work nationally, looking at kind of how we can support more inclusive approaches to digital transformation in mental health. And we also are very lucky to co-deliver MindWell with Volition as well. So we're really proud of MindWell and delivering that on behalf of the city. So really pleased to be here and look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirstin. And if I could pass over to Chris.
Yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Chris. I'm a creative director at Thompson. We're a branding agency who specialise in health and wellbeing. We work across loads of different clients, heavily with the NHS England, NHS Digital. I've seen some of you here. Hi, Roger. Mind, Brook, loads of different types of clients in this space. We also work a bit more widely than that. So I think there are some people from retail, from supermarkets, from local government and that kind of thing. So we've got, yeah, broad cross-sector experience despite that health and wellbeing specialism. My background is heavily UX, which is why I'm really interested in the discussion today, despite working in branding a lot of the time. Yeah, I just want to take part, hear from all these great people on the panel today, and hopefully add in my two penneth for anyone who fancies listening. So yeah, can't wait to get started.
Thanks, Chris. Paul, hand over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Paul Wilkes. I'm a digital inclusion coordinator with 100% Digital Leeds. So our work is focused on working with partners from the third sector and from the health and care sector to produce a coordinated approach to digital inclusion across Leeds and make sure that everybody has the chance to get online and make the most of the digital world. I've got a focus on mental health as well as some other things like reducing reoffending, working with prisons, and I'm also a facilitator at Andy's Man Club as well in my spare time as a volunteer.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul. And last but not least, Gemma.
Thanks, Ali. So a little bit about how this event came to be and what I'm hoping to add to the conversation. So I'm the Content and Communications Manager for MindWell. It's already been mentioned by Kirstin. So MindWell's a mental health and wellbeing website for the people of Leeds. We're funded by the NHS and it's managed through a collaboration between Thrive by Design and Volition. So my background is in digital marketing and creative communications. I'm also someone who uses online platforms probably way more than I should. I checked my phone and last week it was averaging about 3.5 hours a day. I'd like to say that was spent connecting with friends and family, but I'm pretty sure it was spent watching dogs play piano and other interesting pastimes. So the event really came about after a conversation I had with Paul Wilkes from 100% Digital Leeds. So we're very happy to have Paul on our panel today. So we were talking about the pros and cons of the internet and online services. And there's obviously lots of good things to say about digital. It's been a lifeline to many people during lockdown, and that's just one example. But it also has the potential to cause harm, especially when it comes to mental health. And there has been some very sad stories in the news recently about just that. But we're not here today to talk about whether the internet or social media is a good thing or not. I'm sure everyone will have a view on that one way or the other. Instead, we recognise that websites and digital platforms are created and designed by people, perhaps some by people here today. I noticed there's a few UX designers that said hi. So I thought it would be interesting to bring together a panel from a range of disciplines, each of us connected to the digital world and mental health in some way. And we'll be exploring what it means to design with digital health in mind, so that hopefully you can all take away something useful in your day-to-day jobs, and perhaps even introduce changes that could help make our digital spaces feel a bit safer and more inclusive.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Gemma. So given our time, I think let's maybe jump into our discussion. So as discussed at the start of the session, we're here to explore what it means to design with mental health in mind. And I think, Chris, you're going to start us off, kind of talk us through your experience of this kind of subject and how you've approached it previously.
I think so, yeah. Let's just share screen. Has everybody got that?
Yep.
Great. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to kick things off, and if we go, so 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem each year in England. This is a stat by mind. Wow. That's 1/4 of the people on this call this year. That's a lot. That's a lot of people. It's a mind-boggling statistic that in this day and age. But actually, what I'm more interested in is this, which is another stat from Mind, which is 1 in 6 people report experiencing a mental health problem in any given week in England. Actually report a common mental health problem. And if we all think about the digital kind of landscape that we're operating in, or most people will be here, what does that actually mean? Well, if you think about site visitors, maybe every week your site gets 600 visitors. 100 of them will be struggling that week with a mental health problem. If you get 6,000, that'll be 1,000 people. If you get 60,000, that'll be 10,000 people. That's not an insignificant number. Hopefully you can see that this is a large problem that we should all be taking note of and trying to do something about. It's a huge portion of the people that are interacting with your brand or your website every day. And it's getting worse. I don't need to bang on about all the things that's happened through COVID, but that plus many other things are increasing the number of people that are struggling with their mental health. And at the same time as that, people are struggling to get access to the services that they need to support themselves. You know, so the numbers are increasing, people are struggling to get access to services, you know, global health pandemic, etc. This issue is getting worse, so it's becoming more and more important that everybody, no matter what sector or discipline you're in, you know, there's a lot of people on this panel here from the health space, but this is an issue that everybody needs to be considering, no matter what sector you're working in. We all need to do something about it. 1 in 6 really is the best case scenario. You know, mental health is still kind of taboo. I mean, there's loads of great organizations that's done amazing work over the last few years to raise the profile of mental health, to reduce stigma, but people still don't like talking about it. Organizations still don't like tackling it. So when we're talking about people reporting a mental health issue, that 1 in 6, really we're talking about a best case scenario there. And in all likelihood, that's going to be much higher. So if we go back to those numbers that I just said there, the 1,000, 10,000 scenario, you know, there's going to be much, much higher than that. So what I want to talk about is the kind of things that we could all be doing, whether it's on a small scale or a large scale, to help everybody in their day-to-day lives who are accessing the internet. So how do we use design to support people? So you know, good design, in my opinion, is all of these things. Now, these are all terms that kind of mean the same thing. They seem to have come from different sectors. You know, user-centric is a bit more the kind of digital term, as is possibly human-centric. Customer-centric is a bit more marketing-y. Universal design principles come a little bit more from product design. But really, they're all kind of saying the same thing. And that thing is that we should be understanding the needs of real people and creating what they need. So not assuming that our user base or customer base, not assuming what they need, but actually understanding their needs and creating what they need. You know, we've moved over the last few decades from very much a mentality of like selling to, and people, we need to be allowing people to kind of experience what they want and what they need and buy from, if you like, rather than it being the other way around. So that really means that what it boils down to is good UX. So I think that, you know, the title of this this discussion is about UX and UI. We've got quite a few designers on the call, so I'm sure a lot of you know what UX is. UX is user experience. I don't really like the term user because it dehumanizes a bit. I'd rather talk about human experiences and real people. But that, you know, that is the terminology, and that's what we're talking about here. So what is good UX? So what do I think is good UX? Firstly, it's not just considering a digital thing. Yes, we're here on a digital event as part of Leeds Digital Festival, talking about the digital world, but everything is experience. Experience is everything. So whether you're talking to someone on the phone, or they're coming into a retail environment, or they're interacting with a piece of print, or they're receiving something through the post, all of that is experience. All of that should be and can be considered from a user experience perspective, and it's not just about when they're online. Most organizations have got touch points across both the physical and the digital, and joining those up in the right kind of way and understanding the needs of their customers across all of those aspects is really going to help them if they're struggling with their mental health. I think it kind of, for me, mostly breaks down into these three areas. So I think good experience is empathetic. So we want to really understand the needs of the audience. It needs to be accessible, so the content is available to everybody. And it needs to be intuitive, so it needs to be straightforward, easily understandable, and not confusing or complicated. As much as possible anyway. Some things, you know, are complex. It's about simplifying. If we move those principles into more of a digital space, we're talking about those principles working across these three areas. So interface, so the things that you see, functionality, the way that it works, and the code in the digital context, so the way that it's built. So I'm going to go through a few slides in a minute, which cover the principles or the things that can be thought about in these three contexts. One way, just a quick note, that a lot of larger organisations have started to tackle some of these principles from the ground up in the digital space is through creating a design system. Now, I could do an entire talk just about design systems, so I'll not get into the details of that. But this is one that we designed in partnership with NHS Digital a couple of years ago, and really that starts to tackle the kind of all of those principles from accessibility and usability from the ground up, and expand it across potentially a huge range of pages and an entire web estate. And that's what we did with NHS Digital, and it resulted in the overhaul of thousands of pages on their site, all up to AAA accessibility standards, and kind of highly tested and kind of researched along the way. So besides potentially embarking on creating a whole design system, what else can we do to improve those human experiences? Well, one thing which, again, all the UX designers out there, you should be very familiar with this, but it's to follow the guidelines that are out there at the moment. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, available at w3.org. These are the guidelines that set the standard for everybody. For anyone who's working in the public sector, as of 2018, by law, it's required that you hit a AA standard. So if anybody here is not, then you really need to do something about it. In my opinion, all websites should be aiming for that at least. The work we did with NHS Digital there is all to AAA standards, but AA at the very least, we should be aiming to hit, and that's the starting point for any project that we embark on. So when we're looking at the user interface, the things that we see, these are the types of things that we should be considering. We need to consider content, and Gemma's going to talk a little bit about content later, but is it easily understandable? We're not using jargon. It's not too dense, it's kind of broken up nicely, it's scannable, etc., etc. Got to think about color, layout, typography, scale, and even overall quality can have an impact on the user experience. It's all very well thinking about all of these aspects in isolation, but if it doesn't come forward to create a quality whole, then that can impact on people's levels of trust and their kind of just general mindset when interacting with your content there. We need to be thinking about the functionality, of course. So that's navigation, that's the states of buttons and things as you're going along. That's the speed of the site, how quick it loads, how quickly you can get to what you need and the rest of the content, how deep it is, how many pages you've got to navigate through. And really importantly, any integrations that are introduced into that platform, they might not, be considering this sort of stuff. So we can't just integrate something and then assume that it's going to be fine. We've got to be really diligent across the board. And then code, we've got to consider the structure of the code to make sure that it's well structured for SEO and assistive technologies, and that we're using the right syntax, marking everything up again, so that those technologies can that can't necessarily see what we're presenting can understand what's there in the right kind of way. But above all else, we just need to test. This is a testing session we run at our offices as part of the mental health at work project that we saw on the previous slide. And it always leads to interesting insights. It always uncovers things that you never thought of before. But this is an end of process session. What can we do if we don't want to just test at the end, and if we want to tackle things before we get started? Well, you don't need to just test at the end. We can test all the way through. So this is a non-digital project that we did in partnership with FGM survivors to create an awareness campaign of the services that they can access. And we engaged with, Howard here, a major advocate, and several FGM survivors throughout this process to design this piece and test that it was going to work with them, that they were going to understand it, that it was going to resonate with their communities. go one step further, and this is a topic that I know is going to, one or two of the other panelists is going to touch on, really the best case scenario in many contexts is to co-design to an extent, because that is where you really understand your audiences. So that's getting your audiences in the same room, talking to them directly, letting them have an influence, a direct impact on the design process, and engaging them all the way through. And we found particularly, this is from a workshop that we did for our MindMate project. The output of that is incredibly valuable. MindMate would not be the platform that it is today without the help of all of the young people and adults and professionals that have input into the process along the way. And that is the absolute kind of essence of inclusive, accessible design, in my opinion.
Brilliant.
So yeah, just to wrap up, sorry, just final. So to design empathetically, accessibly, and intuitively is the design with mental health in mind, in my opinion. The results of products and services that make life easier for everyone. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. And I think kind of universal considerations there, kind of beyond and including mental health as well. Kirstin, if we pass over to you, and that's kind of linking up with the co-design approach.
Yeah, thank you, Ali, and thank you, Chris. That was a really fascinating presentation. So I haven't got slides. I'm just going to talk for a little while and share a few sort of stories and quotes from some work that we've done in the last few years and some colleagues have done. And I guess I'd start by really echoing what Chris has just explained, that I guess for me, designing with mental health is to design with people in mind and also to design inclusively. So that really resonates with my experience as well. So just to, I guess, give some context as well. So my input to this conversation is more from the perspective of designing within health and care, but I agree, as Chris has just said, that it's really important that we think across the wider kind of tech industry about this and think about how we can design ethically and mindfully, and acknowledging that people who might be experiencing mental health illness are interacting with many services and products day to day. Gemma kind of reflected on her own personal experience of interacting with things. You know, this is so much part of our life now, and it's really important that we kind of consider what people need as we're designing things. So I'm going to share a few reflections from some work and conversations that we've been having at Thrive by Design. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that people's experiences are intersectional. So within that, people who are experiencing mental health illness or symptoms around their mental health, that may exacerbate or impact, I guess, their existing accessibility and inclusion needs. So that's something we really need to consider, and that can change over time and have an impact. And people's experiences do change over time. So this is something that we've kind of learned through conversations we've had with people. So kind of how you're experiencing your mental health and what well-being at any one time can kind of change what you want or you need when it comes to accessing digital, and what support you might need to do that as well. So for example, some people may prefer not to have a smartphone with them all of the time when they're feeling particularly anxious, and that's something that kind of might exacerbate some of their feelings of anxiety. So these are some sort of stories that people have shared with us. And what people need when they're not very well may be quite different from what they need when they are as well. And it might be something to think about, actually, that if we can design things that work for people when they aren't very well, does that kind of help everybody to have a better experience? So I'm going to read a quote now that stuck with me recently from some work that some colleagues have been doing down on the Isle of Wight. So they've been working with people with severe mental illness and looking at how this kind of impacts their use of digital, and they shared some insights with us recently from some research that they've been doing. So this is a quote from one of the people they spoke to. So they said, "It's like a lot of these skills in my personal experience, they desert you when you become ill because your mind is in such a turmoil. You lose those skills of how the basic things work, of how you operate your computer and your PIN, and you're very anxious, so you're frightened to make a mistake." So that's somebody's experience that they shared within that research project. And I'm sure that Paul, in your work, you'll have heard many similar kind of stories and experiences as well. And I'm sure you'll touch on those shortly. So I guess within that as well, we need to consider that a website or a digital tool is one channel. So another insight that I wanted to just share with you, and another quote from a young person that was involved in a co-design piece of work that we did last year. So they said, when I was discharged from inpatient, I was given a piece of paper with digital things and apps I could try. It felt a bit hopeless. I was ill, I was at a plateau, I couldn't be bothered to try them out. And this young person kind of reflected to us that actually they use a lot of digital tools, these sort of apps, they use their phone quite a lot when they were feeling well. But in that moment, when they perhaps needed a bit of support, they were kind of given a list of things and they weren't motivated in any way to kind of use them. And I guess I'm mentioning that as it kind of highlights that wider experience of kind of what do people need around them to support them to get the most from some of these fantastic tools and things that are out there that can really support people. So I guess how do we kind of consider this when we're designing products and services? So Chris talked a little bit about co-design. So at Thrive, we often utilise a co-design approach in our work. And co-design is all about designing with people who are affected by or kind of need to use the thing that you're designing. And something that we're really exploring in all of our work at the moment is how we reach for that to be as inclusive as it can be. So I guess bringing people together in a room to design something is only kind of going to work for as many people as possible if we bring the right people into that space and we make it a space that people can access and are able to contribute to and are able to kind of share their stories in a place that feels safe. So that's something that we're kind of really considering through everything that we're doing. And I guess what we need to really be conscious of, especially in the context of mental health and looking at kind of how we can learn from those experiences, we need to sort of really consider how we can remain sort of trauma informed and responsive. So it's really important we design with living experience at the centre, but in doing that, obviously that means people need to share stories and kind of reflect on sort of some experiences they've had. And how do we do that in a way so we're not kind of re-traumatizing people or causing any harm? And I guess some of that comes down to kind of how we set these spaces up and kind of what support is there for people and for individuals and what support networks are there, but also kind of being really clear about what people will receive in return for being involved and kind of what are we aiming to do, how are we going to communicate, how do we kind of work together to build those kind of ways of communicating and working together so that people kind of know what to expect and know that that is a space that they can offer into in an equal way. So I guess I've shared a few reflections and I'm more than happy to kind of go into any of that at the end in sort of questions. But I guess just to sum up on my initial reflections, for me, this is about really thinking about the whole experience, and something that can be really motivating in this is to really think about those people who may be excluded if we don't get this right and kind of what that means. And I know at this point, I think it's probably fair that we pass on to Paul from your experiences and kind of really share some of that. And that kind of really motivates me to make sure that we're kind of constantly thinking about how we can include people into these conversations and design better things that will work for more people. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kirstin. Paul, do you want to carry on?
Yeah, thanks, Kirstin. Yeah, that was great. So yeah, I'm, as I've said, digital inclusion coordinator. So my role is focused on trying to make sure that everybody understands the relevance of digital to their lives and that everybody is able to access the internet, to use the tools that might be able to help them improve their own mental health and well-being and general health and well-being. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just the barriers very quickly to getting online. So a lot of the people who are digitally excluded lack the skills. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to use a smartphone or a laptop or whatever. Another main barrier is connectivity, where people don't have the internet or they don't have a computer, they don't have a smartphone, don't know where to go. But the two main sort of barriers are confidence and motivation. So a lot of the people who aren't online now is because they don't want to be online or they're not interested. They think, well, I've got this far without being online. Why would I need to? It's not for me. And sometimes that can be the hardest barriers to break down. The way this, I think, ties into mental health is that in a similar way, I think a lot of the people who would benefit most from being online are the ones who aren't online. And a lot of the people who would benefit most from mental health support might not actually necessarily relate to that. They might not see themselves as somebody with depression or somebody who has anxiety. And I speak from experience with that because that was myself a few years ago. So I've always struggled with my mental health. I've always had depression, but didn't really think about that until I was sort of late 20s. I had coping mechanisms, unhealthy coping mechanisms, and it was a bit of a struggle. And I remember one time I was sat in a training session. It was a mental health awareness session, and they were sort of saying, right, let's think of a few words to do with mental health and we'll put them up on the board And so everyone was shouting out stress, anxiety, self-harm, depression, and all these things, and they were getting written in block capitals on this board, and I felt like the walls were closing in. And that day I actually had to leave the training session because I was like, I can't handle this. Like, it triggered something in me. I was just like, I can't do this. So that was a bit of a trigger to actually reach out and start looking for support and realize maybe there is something up. But the reason I'm talking about that as well is because I wanted to give a positive shout out to the MindWell website, because I think there, if you have a look at it, you've got a good example of how UX can be and how design can be beneficial for mental health. Because you go on there and it doesn't have the headings like depression, stress, self-harm, stuff like that. It's quite sort of calming pastel colors, and it says, I'm looking for myself, or I'm worried about someone, or I'm a professional supporting others. It's quite engaging language, and it's stuff that anyone can relate to, and it doesn't matter whether you think, right, I'm looking for something for depression, because sometimes people won't have done that. They won't have gone to the doctors, they won't have explored their own mental health in that kind of way, but they've reached a point where they need to reach out. And so when they see I'm looking for myself, that can be a lot more accessible to them than I'm looking for support with depression or stuff like that. And that also kind of ties into the stuff that I do with Andy's Man Club. So I'm a facilitator there because I started going as a member. I've been going there every Monday for the last 2 or 3 years. But again, they use language which is not about depression and trauma and stuff like this. It's come in and have a brew, come and have a chat. If you're going through a storm, or if you've been through a storm, come down and speak to somebody who might be able to understand what you're going through. It's that sort of soft language that I think keeps things accessible for people. And I think it's very important when we're designing services that we're thinking about that, and we're thinking about the user. It's easy for people who don't have experience with mental health to kind of design these services, but it's important that we're involving people who do have experience with mental health issues, and people who can sort of pick up on any things that might be a bit jarring or might be triggers for people. Same with digital inclusion. A lot of people aren't online. A lot of people, a lot of us who work and live in digital worlds forget how many people there are out there who don't have the skills and don't understand the lingo that we use today. If you're telling somebody to click on a search bar and they're using a tablet and they don't have anything to click with and they don't know what a search bar is, it's no good to them. And a lot of jargon has sort of crept into our modern language as well. Like, even on our devices, the return key or enter key doesn't often say return or enter these days. It's just a left arrow. So if you've not used a computer before, you're not going to know what that does. You're going to think it does the same as a left arrow. The shift is just an up arrow. It doesn't say shift anymore on a lot of devices. And yet we're still telling people to, click on shift in this, like they'll just automatically understand it. But a lot of the work I do is with a lot of different communities of interest, people who are experiencing homelessness, people who are experiencing mental health problems, people with language barriers, disabilities, visual disabilities, audio disabilities, all sorts. I could probably speak a lot longer than I will today about it. But it's very important that in everything that we're doing, we're not just aiming it at one audience. We're trying to think about literally every person and all the different barriers that they have to getting online, or barriers that they have to actually seeking support for their own mental health. We're taking that into mind, and we're making sure that we're designing our services with them in mind. So I think my sort of main takeaway from this is just to keep it simple, keep it accessible, and make sure you're involving the people that it's actually aimed at.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for sharing your own experience as well. I think it's really powerful to kind of hear from all of our kind of different points of view and why we come to this work and why we want to explore it. So thank you. Gemma, last but not least, can I hand over to you?
Great, thanks. I'll just get my slides up. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so thanks for that, Paul, and thanks everyone. Actually, really interesting to hear from everyone. So I'm going to tell you what I think it means to design with mental health in mind from the perspective of the MindWell team. So firstly, let me tell you a little bit more about MindWell and what we're trying to achieve, as I think that's kind of the jumping off point for a lot of my thoughts about mindful user experience. So MindWell is a mental health and wellbeing site, as we've heard a few times. So it launched back in 2016, and it was built specifically for the people of Leeds. The vision is really that it's a single go-to place for mental health information for everyone in Leeds. And if we have any comms people in the room, you'll know that having a target audience of over 500,000 is always going to throw up some unique challenges. So one of the biggest challenges we've faced is actually how to engage with people who might be struggling with a common mental health problem or who've experienced trauma. You know, we needed to make MindWell welcoming and easy to use. So I'm not a psychologist or a doctor, but I can tell you a little bit about how a common mental health problem like anxiety can affect the mind and body, and that in turn affects how someone might interact with your website or app. So many of you have probably heard of the fight or flight response. I think it's quite a well-known concept now. This diagram is actually has been taken from the MindWell website. So we're sort of talking about the primitive part of your brain that responds to threat. So it evolved millions of years ago when we were up against saber-toothed tigers, but these days it responds to anything that it perceives as a subjective threat. So that might be worrying over losing your job or a partner, or perhaps something bigger and out of your control, like climate change or who's running the country. You know, anxiety makes our heart beats faster, we tense our muscles, and we get a big release of adrenaline, sort of preparing for that fight or flight. But it also affects how we think. It affects our working memory, making it harder to retrieve information like passwords. It can also make it harder to complete tasks like filling in forms. It means we're more likely to feel threatened or doubt ourselves. And for some people, as Paul sort of shared some real life examples of, just using technology when you're not confident doing that is enough to cause feelings of anxiety. So this is just one example of how mental states affect sort of our cognition and how we might interact with sort of online services. And mental health and trauma is a massive topic, and we're not expecting anyone here to sort of anyone involved in building a platform to really understand the ins and outs of how our brains work. The good news is you don't need to, because designing mindfully for people who may be experiencing a mental health problem is just good design that respects people's attention and you know, really has that inclusion at the core of what it's trying to achieve. So really sort of a lot of this picks up on what Chris was talking about at the start, you know, making sure that we're working with simplified architecture. So by that I mean sort of reducing any visual clutter or things that are going to distract and confuse people, making sure there's a very clear route through the website or the digital service. Honest copy that doesn't try to manipulate anybody. You know, it's written in plain English. You know, it's a lot of people that use MindWell need to translate our content, and we actually have that you can do that on the site, and so avoiding, you know, because we know that people need to translate the content, we avoid sort of colloquialisms and things like that wouldn't necessarily translate well. Clean and accessible design, so that avoids that cognitive overload, and sort of user-focused experience or human-centered experience, but very importantly, bearing in mind that the user isn't just you. So thinking about MindWell, to make sure we got it right, we held a number of co-design workshops with people who had lived experience to make sure the website was approachable and user-friendly. And this is a picture from way back when those were being carried out. So picking up on what Chris was talking about earlier, these workshops, this is the homepage, MindWell homepage. These workshops informed the things that you can see. So you can see the brand elements. We've used a calming colour palette with inclusive illustration. Tone of voice is also warm and friendly and written in plain English. It also feeds into the way it works. So the homepage navigation, I'm looking for help, I'm looking to help I'm worried about someone, and I'm a professional supporting others. That all came out of sort of research into how people use the website, but also how they thought about their problems. You know, we've avoided sort of labeling things up with that scary mental health language that you know, some people find quite off-putting. And then finally, it feeds into the way it's built. So it's built to meet accessibility standards, and that's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that were mentioned at the start. One thing I think I'd like to get across today is that user design isn't a big bang. Websites can and should be an evolution as you come to understand what people visiting the site really need. This isn't news. Lots of platforms sort of refine their user experience based on feedback, but often what they're trying to achieve isn't what's best for their audience, it's what's best for them. And sometimes what's best for them can in fact be bad for mental health. So I think there's an argument to be had that digital isn't as well regulated as other industries. For instance, we talk about having digital architects or engineers, but they're not held to the same standards as the people who build our hospitals. You wouldn't get away with designing a building with no fire exits, or where the only way to find out about the fire exits was if you read the 900-page terms and conditions book down in the foyer. So I actually stole that analogy from Chris Wiley, who was a panellist at the recent Leeds Festival of Ideas event. And he was there talking about social media. So Chris Wiley, for anyone who's not heard that name before, he was the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower and worked for a big social media company. And his view, and I would agree, is that designers in the digital space are actually in a pretty powerful place, and they have the potential to do good and harm in this world. And in some ways, digital is kind of at odds with mental health. Often sort of the technology we have is sort of designed to suck us in and keep us distracted. But on the other hand, when we're talking about mental health, digital spaces have also been a game changer, and they've helped sort of bring a taboo topic into the light. You know, if people being able to go online and not only get a better understanding of sort of mental health, either for themselves, other people in their life, but also to find people going through the same thing. You know, we talk a lot about connection and sort of, I think that it's really helped with that. You know, often mental health research, there's people sort of learning about what mental health is. Often that research is carried out in private, you know, perhaps from visiting websites, but that could be the first step to someone feeling confident enough to seek help. So, you know, you could say that web design for charities or mental health websites like MindWell is different because we're more likely to be serving a more vulnerable population or people already experiencing a mental health issue. But just to remember, Chris's statistic at the start that 1 in 6 people report experiencing a mental health issue each week. You know, and I hope that gets across the message that you know, mindful design is for the people you work with too, and in fact benefits everyone. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say. Yeah, so join, you know, follow us on Twitter and check out the website.
Brilliant, thank you, Gemma. We've covered a lot of ground in this very short session, and in a minute I'm just going to ask the panel what the one thing they would hope people would kind of take away from this session and kind of integrate into their own work. But before that, we maybe have a couple of minutes to answer some questions. So if anyone wants to put some questions in the Q&A box. Feel free to do that now. But Gemma, I might come back to you just to think about what's that one thing that you would hope people would kind of take with them from this session and integrate into their own work.
Well, actually, it's that digital isn't the answer to everything. You know, I think using today as an example and being on this call, you know, there's a lot of prep that goes into things like this, and obviously we're using digital tools today. But what's really helped me is having the support of all the panelists and having a chance to have a chat before we came on. You know, making sure that human interaction isn't lost in the bigger design of systems. That I think digital definitely has a part to play, but it needs to be properly embedded and sort of it complements the human experience rather than sort of owning it.
Brilliant, thank you, Gemma. Paul, should I pass to you the same question?
Yeah, and I'll just respond to one of the comments in the chat as well, because I responded and I accidentally sent it to the hosts and panelists, so I don't think anyone can see it anyway. But it was from Emily, and about people maybe just wanting to go into the branch and not wanting to do stuff online because of their own anxieties around that. And I think that's completely understandable. There are a lot of people who are anxious about using online solutions and things like that, and often it's because they don't understand it and they don't have the skills and they may be digitally excluded. But for them, it can be a case of it's going to cause them more trouble down the line if they're sort of avoiding the online stuff and just dedicated to coming into the branch every week, but never sort of trying out the online, because then if it does, the branch closes, or if they get thick snow or stuff like that and they need services and they're not able to, you know, get a bit of shopping in or whatever it may be, then it can be a bit harder for them. So one of the things that we encourage is for services to embed little bits of digital into what they do, whether that's because same with the mental health thing, somebody who doesn't see themselves as having depression isn't going to turn up at a depression support group. Somebody who doesn't see themselves as a digital person often won't come to a digital class or an IT skills class, but they might be in a food class where somebody can show them how to look up a recipe on an iPad, or they might be in a different sort of setting where they're like your branches, but they might be coming down every week. And I think it's a good thing to embed a little bit of digital into everything that we do, so that people are getting used to it and people aren't so intimidated when inevitably more and more services do go online, because it is, you know, it's going that way, and people are getting left behind. So yeah, I just think it's important that we're always designing our services with everybody in mind, and like Gemma said, not just designing it for what we want out of the customer or what we need, but also thinking about what the customer needs and how can we sort of help give them a little bit of development as well as just what they've come for.
Brilliant, thank you, Paul. Kirstin, I'm going to pass over to you. Same question. What one thing would you like people to take away from this session?
Yeah, I think we've covered lots and lots of ground, but I guess something that is a theme that I think has come through it all is around not making assumptions. So I think, Chris, you mentioned that at the beginning. It's something that we've experienced lots in the work that we've done, talking to people, understanding what people need, and doing that more than once, as well as Gemma was saying, that kind of co-design or testing with people or getting people's insight isn't just a one job that you do at the beginning of a process, and kind of always checking back in and understanding what people need and how people are finding things. That would be my takeaway. And I guess just to reflect on the example that was in the chat as well, we saw this live earlier in the week with a colleague. I was at a GP practice talking to people about their experiences using different types of ways to communicate with their doctor at the moment. Obviously there's lots of different ways of doing that. Actually, what we observed at the practice was there's still lots and lots of people, majority of people in the waiting room are coming in because they can't use the online booking system or the phone lines are busy. So people are resorting to that face-to-face. And as Paul said, if that, you know, during COVID, that wasn't an option for people, so kind of what happened then and how can we kind of support people to be able to use these different systems is really important. I'll stop there.
Brilliant, thank you, Kirstin. Last but not least, Chris, hand over to you.
Yeah, I think I'll keep it short. and it's just that this is something that everybody needs to be concerned with. You know, I think everybody pretty much talked about it, and Gemma ended on it there. It's not a niche subject. It's something that everybody needs to keep in mind, whether you're you know, the founder of an organization, whether you're in the comms team, whether you're a designer, no matter where you are, if you're having an impact on the things that your audiences and the people of the world interact with and see, it's something that you should be thinking about all the time.
Brilliant, thank you, Chris. We've had a couple of questions, and I'm just going to go to the first one in the chat. So, what authoring tools or software do you find most helpful for creating inclusive design with mental health in mind? Does anyone want to pick up on that? So, what authoring tools or software? Chris, do you want to jump in?
I can do, yeah. So I think you're not going to like this answer, but I think it comes a lot of the time down to dedicating time to actually understand and gain the knowledge rather than relying on tools to deliver the answers for you. There are, I don't know if you're a developer, for example, there are tools to check accessibility standards on a website, for example, but they're not always super accurate. And one of the greatest things and worst things about the web content accessibility guidelines is that they're guidelines and they are somewhat interpretable, you know, in some areas. So you've got to have that understanding of your audience and the context within which you're working in to actually apply those in the right kind of way each time. So yeah, it's not a straightforward answer, unfortunately, but really it's down to building your own independent knowledge of your audiences and what they need and the guidelines, and matching those things together to create the best possible product or service.
Brilliant. So no quick fix then?
Unfortunately not.
I know. Anyone else want to come in on that, or are you happy to move to the next question? Let's jump to the next question. Okay, so the next question is colour the most important factor in web page design? This relating to man's evolution, red for danger, etc. So you can read the rest of that comment, but is colour the most important factor in web page design?
Who wants to take this? It's not me.
Well, I mean, I can just, I think, you know, red does seem to be quite a common use for crisis page. I know we certainly, our need urgent help button is red. I can't speak for whether that there is actually any scientific reason for that, quite possibly. In terms of its, you know, how colour is used for design, I think one of the things that's been a bit of a learning curve for me. So I mentioned that my background, sort of working in creative comms before. I think the biggest difference between, you know, approaching a project from the perspective of brand and sort of where colour doesn't, you're not necessarily thinking about it in terms of accessibility. And I think this has been the big learning for me, that the way I experience the world isn't the way other people experience the world, you know. So learning about the need for colour contrast, you know, for people who have issues reading words, for instance, if they're not, if the contrast isn't good enough. And again, there are tools you can use to check that. For the MindWell site, the colour palette was really important, because a lot of the feedback that came out of the co-production workshops was that you know, often people are visiting, they're in a heightened emotional state, and really what they're looking for before they get to the information is just a sense of sort of feeling like they're in a safe place, that it's that sort of comforting palette that we've used to reassure people. I don't know, Chris, if you had anything to add from a design perspective. or anyone else?
Yeah, probably. I can't, for some reason I can't see that specific question in the side. But if the question is called the most important thing in accessible design, was that? Can you just repeat it to me, Ellie, please?
Similar. So is colour the most important factor in web page design?
Yeah, I'd say no. I think it is a really important consideration, but some people can't see the same colours that you can. Some people are colourblind, for example. So if yes, red means danger, but only if you can see red. And actually there's more people that's colourblind than you might expect. I can't remember the stat off the top of my head, but Google it, you'd be surprised. I think the most important factor is the content, making sure that is readable, accessible, digestible. All the internet is really is it's a content hub. Design is just something to go around content to support to support people's understanding of it, but really websites are about presenting content to people. So I would say that the content is the thing to concentrate most of your time on, and making sure that that's accessible.
Brilliant, thank you, Chris. We've had a few more questions. Let's just finish off with one last one. So how should designers and stakeholders tackle the risks of handling confidential information / data when designing digital services in the healthcare industry? That is a long question. I'll just repeat that. How should designers and stakeholders tackle the risks of handling confidential information / data when designing the digital services in the healthcare industry? Kirstin, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can start, and we probably haven't got too long to go into this, but I guess a couple of things I'd say. So make sure that you have experts in the team and involve them in the process. So if you look at the co-design model, you need everybody that's affected by that involved in that in some way. So they're one of your key stakeholders to kind of understand that. And also there's something about really understanding what information you need to collect and process and why, and kind of what people sort of trust, and other aspects might be around that from, I guess, people's perspective. And then I'll share a link in the chat as well. Rishi, you might already know this, you might work in healthcare, but there is something called the DTAC, which you need to consider when creating digital tools within healthcare, and it's something that you'll be assessed against, and that includes information about data protection. So I can share a link to that, but that's a very quick answer to probably a much longer question.
Thank you, Kirstin. I think that's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of your questions, and also to the panel today for sharing their experiences. I found it really helpful, and a lot of information to process there, but really helpful information. Zoe, do you want to stick up the last slide? Have we got any contact detail information on that? Brilliant. As we said at the start of the session, the recording of the session will be shared, and that information will be sent out to everyone who's signed up for the event. And yeah, thank you everyone for your time today. It's lovely to have a chat with you all, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
See you soon.
Bye.